Welcome in. It is Big Ten Today on a Thursday. We are presented by Rally House, and we are thrilled to have you with us. Dave Revson and Howard Griffith. 8 games on the slate.
Nice, right?
I think we got a fair amount to talk about the next hour.
We got a lot to talk about, and it's going to be fun. Now, we have some teams that we think are changing their identity a little bit. Will they be able to sustain? There are a lot of things that we'll continue to find out about some teams this week.
And I do think once you get into conference play, you know more about who the team is playing.
Yeah.
Right? So I think you can assess a little bit more when you see a result. What does this actually mean? I think sometimes that's hard to gauge in non-conference play, but we are all conference play between now and the last weekend in November when there are a couple of non-conference games. Let's get into the big story, and it is the ranked matchup in State College. Illini and Nittany Lions. The 28th time these two have gotten together, but just the second time they've both been ranked, and the first time that it's happened in a conference game. The other time was in the late 50s. Illini, 2 wins over ranked teams in September. It's the first time they've ever done that. They're looking for a third at Beaver Stadium as the Nittany Lions finally get to open conference play at home, and James Franklin hoping for a decided home field advantage.
We need this place rocking next week. I'm calling for white out energy. Everybody got me? That could be all your headlines. I'm writing your headlines. I'm the editor. White out energy next week. My man's shaking his head. No. Yeah. No. So you like I said white out and I paused and you guys are waiting? Energy. So that's going to be big next week. We need this place rocking.
It's kind of like a spaceship out in the middle of nowhere, and there's dress. I don't know if they're going to be in blue and white or whatever they're going to be in this weekend. They're going to be dressed right, and it's probably going to be one or the other. They're calling for a white out energy, whatever the hell that means. It'll be an environment that hopefully one of the things you gain with experience is the ability to do better, right? And obviously we did a lot of good things Friday night in Lincoln, but this will be taking it to whole nother level.
So Illinois did pretty well in a supercharged environment in Lincoln. This is going to be a great environment in State College. There's been a lot made of what Brett Bielema said there. I think if you listen to Brett's entire news conference, he was incredibly complimentary of Penn State, of the program, of the fan base. But that little sentence
That's all it takes, right?
Yeah, seems to have riled some people up. Are we making too much of this? Like, is this a story?
It depends on who you are, right?
Yeah.
If you're a Penn State fan or you're in that locker room, absolutely you're playing this thing up and you're playing that particular clip. If you're an Illinois fan, you're probably excited about it too because you're saying, hey, we just went into Lincoln and took care of business.
Yes.
Now we're going back into another hostile environment. Let's see what we're able to do. But at the end of the day, it's a lot about nothing. Penn State and that whiteout is incredible when they have that. He just wants that same energy that the fans have.
Right, and this is the beauty of college football, right? That it is about so much more than the games. We love the games, but it's the pageantry that surrounds it. It's the history. It's all of this different stuff, which I think makes it so much fun. And the fact that you can kind of create, you can get incentivized, you can get riled up by lots of different factors that maybe have nothing to do with the X's and O's. But our job largely is to talk about the X's and O's. So from that point of view, what interests you the most and what I think is a great matchup?
Yeah, I think when you start to think about how this Illinois team is ultimately going to respond, and we just mentioned, we talked about the big win that they had on the road against an opponent that they really struggled against the year before. So this is the Illinois team that's really starting to play a lot better as a team. You look at defensively, they're taking the football away. Offensively, they're doing really well in that area too. So the matchup is offensively, defensively. This is a Penn State team that, yes, they're probably not as good as they would be in the secondary because of some injuries, but this is still an outstanding team, and Tom Allen is slowly but surely putting his identity into this football team.
That is what is interesting to me. Penn State, there's been so much talk about Andy Kotelnicki and this offense, and deservedly so.
Yes.
It is much better. It's exactly what they wanted it to be. It's more explosive. It's a lot of fun to watch unless you're an opposing defensive coordinator. Defensively, I do feel like the bar was really high. They've been so good these last couple of years. And it's hard to gauge. This is kind of what I was saying off the top. I mean, let's just be honest. Kent State's bad. Like, they're just not a very good football team this year. Maybe they will be a year from now. Maybe they'll get better as the year goes on. But what we're seeing from them is not great football. But against Bowling Green, Penn State struggled in that first half. And then since then, they have played 6 really good quarters of defensive football, but this is a different challenge. Luke Altmaier's playing great.
He is playing really well. When you think about where Luke Altmaier has come to from last year to this year, he is really doing a great job when you talk about being protected in the pocket. He's really been surgical, being able to take this team and lead them offensively. The wide receivers have stepped up and played really well, but this is really clear. If you are able to pressure the pass game of Illinois, that's when you start to have success. And that's with any team. Quarterbacks don't like to be pressured, but when they have an opportunity to just sit back and survey, they're going to be able to find that open receiver. And that's really what it comes down to.
And this is where it's interesting to me with Penn State this year is they only have 4 sacks, and they had 49 last year. They led the nation. And so there you see the pass protection for Luke Altmaier and how well he's done, to your point, with a clean pocket versus when he's under pressure. And again, I think this holds for a lot of quarterbacks, but then the onus is on Tom Allen and this defense, Howard, to figure out a way to get at the quarterback in the way that Penn State's defense did a year ago and in the way that, for whatever reason, it really hasn't to this point.
And be able to be disciplined in those third down situations when you have an opportunity to get out after the quarterback and not have penalties there. They need to be able to create pressure, and whether that's going to be from the outside or the interior, quarterbacks don't like it in their face, but they have to find ways to be creative to be able to get to the quarterback. Does that mean bringing a safety down and trying to disguise some different things and putting the onus on your corners to really have the ability to hold up? This will be one of those games. It'll be a great chess match going back and forth.
But I love the extent to which Luke Altmaier has cut down on the mistakes. I mean, he's yet to throw an interception this year, 10 touchdown passes, just such a departure from last year where he really struggled on that front. Now, most of the attention, for whatever reason, in this game, I feel like has gone to the other side, right? It's been about Penn State's offense and about Illinois' defense. And maybe part of it is just how much each one of them's improved.
Right.
Penn State is much better offensively. They are more explosive, no doubt. And for Illinois, Aaron Henry's done an amazing job with that defense. Here's where it's interesting to me, and I'm interested in your opinion. I want to ask Joel Klatt about this a little bit later as well, and we were talking about this, Ashley and I were yesterday. There was so much talk before that Kansas game about Aaron Henry and how focused he was on making up for the frustration of last year and how poorly they played against Kansas, giving up well over 500 yards, and Jalen Daniels ran all over the place. And Aaron Henry was saying, I watched the film over 100 times, which when you do the math on that, is kind of staggering. He spent a lot of time watching the film. But that was Andy Kotelnicki's offense. So to me, this is the real test. Again, nothing against Kansas. It turns out Kansas isn't having a great year right now. Maybe they turn it around. But this, to me, is a much more telling measurement of how far Illinois' defense has come than what they do against Kansas, because it was Andy Kotelnicki's offense. It wasn't, again, all respect to Jalen Daniels, but it wasn't Jalen Daniels calling that offense. It was Kotelnicki.
And that's where, when you talk about the chess matches of games, the end games, this is what it comes down to, and you talked about it, the jump that Illinois has been able to make defensively, taking the football away. But remember also at this particular point, they had quite a few injuries. They were playing some younger players, but this is an opportunity, I think, for really both coordinators, and particularly Aaron Henry, to really be able to, how does he control? Because it's going to be, his players are going to have to be so disciplined, because there's going to be so many movements, right? You pre-snap things are going to be going on. And you really can get an opportunity to see just how dynamic this offense can be for Penn State. One of the things that's really jumped out at me over the last couple of weeks is watching the backs out of the backfield and some of the routes that they've been running. They've been vertical routes, right? Down the seams, not necessarily a check down that's 4 or 5 yards off the line of scrimmage, or a wide route that's run to the wide side of the field or the short side. These guys have been going vertical, which means a linebacker or a safety has to defend that back. And we know how explosive Allen and Singleton can be, and now we're starting to see them more involved in the pass game, so that'll be some matchups to keep an eye on.
Now, already 5 plays of 40 yards or longer. We talked about just 8 all of last year. I do think so much of what Illinois has done has been premised on forcing turnovers, and Drew Aller, even last year where I know it felt like he was kind of working his way into the offense, he does not make mistakes. He's thrown 2 interceptions in his career. So you think about Illinois, already 7 picks this year, which equals last year's total. I'm not saying that's all that they do on defense, but it's been a big part of why they've been successful. And
critical times.
Yes. Yeah.
Critical times.
Yes. And it's tough to get Drew Aller to make those kinds of mistakes.
And couple that with Drew Aller's ability to extend plays with his legs.
Yeah.
He's going to do more of that. And it's really about putting these defensive players of Illinois in conflict. And we'll see. This is going to be a great test for this Illinois defense.
Cushy non-conference schedule, no doubt. They haven't really been tested a whole lot.
Yes.
They'll be tested more against Michigan State. Yeah. What would it take for Michigan State, in your opinion, to have a chance to make this a game and maybe even pull off a shocking upset? What would they have to do?
Yeah, I think ultimately they have to take the ball away and really be able to score points off of that. I think one of the things you're starting to see is just how vast this offense and multiple this offense of Ohio State can be. If they need to throw it, they can throw it. If they want to play big boy football and put 2 tight ends in the game and run it, they can do that. But I think when you look at their ability to create, and this is about Chip Kelly and what he's able to do with the pieces that he has, I don't think we've seen this offense really just explode just yet with all the different formations and personnel groupings that they can come up with. People try to say, well, Kelly he wants to throw it all over the field. He can do it all. When you look at his history, he has done it all in many different ways offensively. And when you have the type of talent that you have at Ohio State, and you got to get the ball to the receivers, you got to get it to the backs, you got to keep people happy, but it's about winning football games and also looking toward the future, right? They understand what they've played to this point, and they haven't had to really open up this playbook to be able to win games because they just have better players. I think now we're going to start to see that happen because now you want to put that on tape for some of your Big Ten opponents.
Emeka Egbuka said this week, we expect to score a touchdown on every snap from center. And then he paused and he said, unless it's a quarterback sneak or something. So he doesn't expect them to break the quarterback sneaks for 70 yards. But that's the mentality of Ohio State. There's so much talent. They're dripping with talent everywhere. And to your point, I do feel like it's just the tip of the iceberg because to beat the opponents that they played so far, they didn't have to do a whole lot that was particularly unusual. And I am interested to see what this starts to look like, what they want to put on tape for Oregon, for instance, to have to prepare for on October 12th.
And remember, that quarterback is still learning to be the quarterback at Ohio State. It's not just that offense we've talked about. It's just not about being able to play in between the lines. It's also being able to manage the pressure that's going to come with the lofty rankings that they're going to continue to have as long as they continue to win.
What about MSU? I mean, they really are. They easily could have won the game at BC. They're one bad decision away maybe from winning that game. Probably should not have thrown the ball into the end zone there at the end. And that's, to me, that's kind of what you get with a young quarterback, particularly one with as live an arm as Aiden Childs has. You know that in his past he's been able to get the ball into places that maybe others wouldn't try to get it just because of how good his arm is. But now you're facing better competition. And so that's part of the adjustment period, I would assume, for a young QB is figuring out, hey, those are windows I can get it in high school maybe. I'm not going to be able to get it in now.
And I think he'll have the attention, and his coaches will make sure that he has the attention that this is an elite team with an elite secondary that's going to be able to get to the football. And I think the other side of that is you think about just how athletic Ohio State is on the defensive side. You can't make mistakes. It's not about you being able to make mistakes. It's about making sure you take care of the football so that you can play another down. Do you need to be able to run the football and be effective? Absolutely. Is third and long going to be the perfect, or second and long going to be the perfect situation? Not a chance, because now when you end up in the pass situations, they're just going to be able to rush the passer, and that's not what you want a young quarterback to be able to do. This is going to be one of those games where he's going to have to be able to take a huge jump from a maturity standpoint at the quarterback position. There's some things you just can't try, right, if you want to be able to stay in this game. If he's dropping back, throwing it 40 to 50 times a game, in this game, the game's not close. That's not where you want to put them.
I thought Jonathan Smith made an interesting point this week. He said there's a difference between playing with energy and playing with reckless abandon. And you're certainly going to get the energy from Aiden Childs and that desire.
Yeah.
But I think that's kind of what you're getting at, that you can't make bad decisions with the football because that, against a team like Ohio State, you already have essentially no margin for error. And if you give them the ball in situations where you're driving it, that's a recipe
not where you want
to
to
lose. No, it's a recipe to lose. It's been a while since Michigan State has beaten Ohio State in East Lansing. The Spartans coach, the last time that happened was a fellow named Nick Saban. It was 1990. Marines were victorious against USC thanks to a punishing run game, 290 yards, 157 of which came on 3 long runs. They had just 32 passing yards. Now they get a Minnesota team that had some trouble stopping the run against Iowa last week. As Caleb Johnson-led Hawks went for 272 on the ground. P.J. Fleck well aware it will not get easier on Saturday in Ann Arbor.
You know, the big house is not called the little house. It's called the big house for a reason. But we can't let the circumstance dictate our behavior. And, you got to be able to play anywhere in the Big Ten. And you've been preparing for that all offseason. In terms of their offense, they're going to run the football. They did that with Jim Harbaugh. They're doing that with Sharon. And they're doing it in a lot of unique ways, especially with the quarterback change. They're big, they're strong. We've got to be able to stop the run.
Yeah, it was good. Good to get that first experience as a starter and play, especially in a big-time game and a great atmosphere like it was on Saturday. So, yeah, there's a good bit that we can add and things that we can do to complement the running game. And obviously the running game was successful, but want to be balanced. And, we've had years in the past where we've had those games like that we've had to win like that. And not afraid to win like that as long as we win. So we'll definitely just keep rolling.
And they had their best team, certainly in recent memory, but arguably ever last year, that won a game like that against Penn State where they didn't throw the ball at all in the second half. So to Sharon Moore's point, this is a huge departure. The difference is that team had J.J. McCarthy. They knew they could throw it if they needed to. Yeah. Does this game just come down to, in your opinion, can Minnesota stop the run, and can they force Michigan to at least have to try to throw the ball?
Trevor, I think it does, ultimately. I think because what's happening here is Minnesota's put on film from last week that they're going to struggle stopping the run. So their point of emphasis all week has been trying to stop the run and find ways of doing it. And I think really from the podium, you heard both coaches talk about what needs to happen and what they're going to do moving forward. As we talked about, PJ, they got to stop it. They understand. It looks like Michigan is now going to run the football. They're going to be a run-heavy team as they continue to allow Orji to develop into the passer. It's not that he can't throw it. He can. There's no doubt about it. It's about finding the plays to get him comfortable. But now when you have him at quarterback, it puts a tremendous strain on your defense because he can take it the distance too. And then you look at the talented backfield, what are you going to do? Are you going to force him to pitch it, or are you going to force him to keep it? You don't want either one of those things to happen. So you ultimately have to pick your poison. But there's going to come a point in this game where Alex Orji is going to have to come up with a big play in the passing game, whether it's a third down, third and long. He's going to have to be able to make some of those plays. But as Michigan has already said, and you heard Coach Moore talk about it, there's still further and more for this offense to continue to expand. They just have to take care of the football. And I think what we're seeing right now is Michigan making the switch offensively of what their philosophy was going to be in the first couple of weeks to what they believe that this is going to look like moving forward. And I think it's going to be more of a run-dominant team, which will allow some things to happen down the field vertically with some big plays. Yeah. Right? They should be able to hit some big plays if they're going to be so committed, if their defenses are going to be committed to trying to take the run away.
To me, the challenge is, you look at that second half against USC, they didn't have a first down for the first 27 and a half minutes of the second half. And I get that they won the game, and I'm totally with Sharon Moore. We won the game against a good team. That was what he said. And I'm with him 100%. You win in whatever way that you have to. But can you do that against some of the – and again, USC's a good team.
Yes.
but there are some other really good teams on this schedule, and they won by the narrowest of margins. They were able to pull that off. Yeah. So I think it goes back to your point, which is at some point you're going to have to prove to an elite team that you can beat them with a pass down the field, because they'll just load more and more guys up.
Let's go back a couple of years with JJ under center, right? And they would run the ball, and they would say, well, at some point, JJ's going to have to throw it. We've got to be able to throw the football, right, to be able to elevate, to beat some of the best teams. And they continue to get better.
Then he became a first-round pick.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, they won a national championship. Yeah. So the plan and the system's already in place. So it's not like this is a departure. Right. They're going with a quarterback now that can run it, more athletic maybe as a runner than JJ was, and we're going to find out what he is as a passer as the season continues to move forward.
Yeah, that game in the early window on Saturday, Joel, different to me, Howard. I'm not necessarily saying they're going to win the game and go to 4-0, but they feel different than those teams, and the biggest reason to me they feel different is they've proven they can throw the ball. And that is a departure for Rutgers.
And take care of the football, and that's a big part of it. But they've really been able to get that done. Klatt has been able to come up with some plays and really develop. And, I have to go back to our chance seeing him this summer when it was just raining outside.
Yeah, I didn't see as much of him as you did because I'm a little
It wasn't
softer.
A great day. It wasn't a great day. But I always go back to that when I'm watching this team because of just the excitement that you saw from this offense, that they were still throwing the football in tough conditions, and they believe now that they can get it done. So it's not all Kyle Monangai, but they know that they can throw the football too, and it's still going to lean heavily on what they need to be able to do, what they look like on first down, if they feel like they may be more comfortable throwing it as opposed to throwing it on third down after they've chunked, eaten away some of those yardage, and you get in a third manageable situation.
So I would just say this, like if you would have told me a year ago the Rutgers was going to play a road game and they weren't going to have a run longer than 12 yards against a good team, and hey, can they win that game? I would have told you no. I mean, unless maybe they forced 3 turnovers or something crazy could happen out there. But no. I mean, to me, like, could they – maybe the question would be, could they have an effective offensive game? Maybe that's the better question. Could they have an effective offensive game if they only ran it for 12 yards as their long run and if Monangai had 84 yards total? And my take would have been no. But I think the difference here is exactly what you were talking about, that Klatt is comfortable that if a team says you have to beat us with the pass game, they could not do it a year ago, they can do it now.
And they can do it now. And that gives this, the play callers more confidence to be able to go out. I think it helps the entire team to be able to go out and manage what they need to do offensively and how you put the game plan together at the beginning of the week to be able to attack them. They're going to have to get some of that stuff done, right? Because this is a Washington team that's...
Yes. Right. I don't want to not talk about Washington here because they're really good. This defense is tremendous. And again, you think about, I think the thing that's amazing about Washington is how well it's come together given the total unfamiliarity that all these people had playing football with one another.
And I think that's why so much of it is the psychology of the game, the preparation for the game. Guys are buying in. We're going to talk about another team that we're seeing guys buy in that have come from all over the place in Indiana. But when we watch Washington, this is really a good story and a great story to continue to follow because it's just not about trying to put the pieces that are going to fit on the football field. You still have to get guys to be able to buy in to what it is that you're doing. Oh, by the way, this coach had a great deal of success last year as well, right? When you think about what he was able to do at Arizona. So now I just think it just becomes a byproduct. You buy into the system because you're saying, okay, you want to win? We know how to win. I know how to win. I've won where I've been. I have experiences. And I think that's what, if you get the right people into your program, they buy in right away. It takes time, but they still buy in right away.
Steve Belichick's done an amazing job. He is really good.
You think he can't get players to play? Say, I've been around.
I know what it's like at the next level, and that's part of Jed Fish's sell as well. Is that, hey, I've been in the NFL. I know what it takes to get you there.
This is what you need to do.
It's worked out pretty well. I'm really excited about that game tomorrow night. I think that's going to be
a good one.
A heck of a game. That'll be a really good atmosphere, too, at Rutgers. Back in Chicago on Big Ten today. The big board, as always, giving us the overview for the weekend ahead. I want to talk through a few of these, but you've got the first Big Ten game for Oregon, visiting old Pac-12 rival UCLA. Wisconsin coming off a much-needed bye. They head to the Coliseum. Purdue hosts Nebraska. Big noon on Fox in Ann Arbor for that Minnesota-Michigan clash. Fox Sports lead game analyst Joel Klatt joining the show now. And Joel, we always like to look back before we look ahead. You had a chance to see Ohio State in person last week. I know it's not the most competitive game or opponent against Marshall, but what was your biggest takeaway from watching the Buckeyes?
Well, I mean, they are good everywhere, and this is a team that I think is one of the best teams in the country. There's no other way to really talk about them. You know, for instance, they get Donovan Jackson back at left guard, so this is the first time that we saw them with really their intended starting offensive line, and their run game really flourished. Granted, against Marshall, but this Marshall defensive front was the best defensive front that they will have seen up to this point in the season. With Judkins in the backfield, along with Henderson, that run game is spectacular, and they're creative with Chip Kelly and their schematics, and then all they have to do is get the ball in the hands of some of those wide receivers and they can take it the distance. So the offense in and of itself is just highly explosive. I thought the defense would be a little bit better, but you've got to credit Marshall's game plan. The ball was out of Stone Earl's hands very early in the sequence. Running some of those RPOs, getting the ball out of his hand was clearly part of their plan. And the defense just ended up smothering Marshall. This team is in a great position right now because they have not had to exert a lot of effort up until this point in the season. And it's very similar in terms of schedule makeup, roster makeup with veteran players as what Michigan was a year ago. And I'm telling you, that's an advantage. Rev, when you're talking about a long season, not having to get yourself revved up for a true matchup game early in the season is going to pay dividends later in the season just because of freshness of players and the ability to have those guys ready to go.
It hasn't been the toughest schedule. It'll be very different next year when they play Texas early on, as Michigan had to. And then Michigan lost that game against Texas, but comes out with a win against USC in a really hard-fought game.
Yeah.
Joel, I don't want to in any way minimize what Michigan accomplished because it's fabulous. And as was pointed out after the game, like, hey, they won the game. And, you know, I don't think you can ever look askance at a win. And Sharon Moore said, hey, we beat a really good football team. That being said, they had 32 passing yards. And so I guess my question for you is, can they be a playoff team when they can only throw for 32 yards in a game against a team like USC?
So I think both of these things can be true. I think that they can maximize their team's potential by playing within their philosophy and that ceiling be lower than we anticipated. I think both of those statements are true for Michigan. I do not know if they can go out there and be a playoff team because I think that they're going to have to beat either Oregon or Ohio State. And those two teams are just very talented. And I think that they're better at the line of scrimmage than what USC was. It was very difficult. If they don't get those long runs, USC beats them. You know, and USC's defense for the majority of the game did a really fabulous job. And we saw, even with dominant stretches of defense for Michigan early in that game, we saw what happened when the offense was unable to stay on the field and sustain drives. Then the defense becomes exposed to more snaps. When that happened, USC was able to move the football. The credit to Michigan is that they made the few plays necessary in order to win the game. The pick six by Will Johnson, Mullings the long run, obviously breaking a tackle and setting themselves up for the score. Those were crucial, and they shouldn't apologize. And Sharon Moore is right. They beat a really good team in USC, and they did it in a very unique fashion. But to suggest that they've got some sort of like extra gear that they can go to raise their ceiling, I think that's where I would say is a bit of a fallacy for the rest of the year.
And teams do get better. And so we'll see whether or not he hinted on Monday in his news conference that, hey, there are more things we can add to the pass game. And
Well, and Colston Loveland didn't play in that game,
absolutely.
and he's certainly their best receiving threat on the outside. You would think that Orji would get much better throwing the football. And I'll just bring up for an example, this is the exact same conversation that we were having about Alabama last year when they lost to Texas early in the season. And we all thought, hey, can they really go to the playoff or win the SEC with Jalen Milroe at quarterback? And look what happened. They do win the SEC. They beat Georgia, and they're in the playoff with a 4th and goal in overtime to potentially tie Michigan, who won the national championship. So there is an opportunity for them to grow in the passing game and become something that right now we don't think they are.
Hey, I want to ask you about a few other teams from the Big Ten, maybe that we weren't expecting to be towards the top or generating buzz or undefeated at this point in the season. Indiana is an obvious one. Illinois had a great win over Nebraska. Rutgers has been really good, went into Virginia Tech and won. Of those three, is there one that's impressed you the most?
I think Illinois. You know, I don't want to minimize the other two because you're right. They're all great stories. But Reb, Illinois did it in an environment that I think is the most difficult against a team that we all thought a lot of in Nebraska and Dylan Raiola. Weeknight wins don't happen on the road, generally speaking. If you look at the history of college football, those weeknights, we used to do Thursday nights. We've done Friday nights. It's very difficult to go win on the road because generally those environments are all ramped up due to the nature of the unique night that it's being played. And that was certainly the case with Nebraska and their 400 sellout. And Illinois just went in there. They had a better game plan than Nebraska, and they out-executed them to end the game. If I'm Nebraska, I'm frustrated that we lose another game that we feel like we shouldn't have. Raiola missed a throw late. There were some things left on the table, certainly, for Nebraska. But I credit Illinois. That's why they would be the most impressive of those three. Think of it this way, too. Luke Altmaier has been terrific for them. And the fact that their defense looks a lot more like the 2022 version of their defense, to me, at least for the better part of the remainder of the year, looks like they've got some staying power.
I'm really interested in the defensive matchup for them this week, taking on Andy Kotelnicki and Penn State, because you remember a year ago, Aaron Henry had all kinds of trouble defending Kansas, and Kotelnicki was the offensive coordinator for the Jayhawks then. Now he gets another look at him with Penn State. It's amazing to think for Illinois, like here they are. Last week was the first time in 16 years they had played in a game ranked team against ranked team. Now they do it for the second time in 2 weeks in a really hostile environment. What would it take for Illinois to go into another tough place to play and come out with another win?
Yeah, so Penn State's better than Nebraska, right? So, let's start with that premise right there. And then I want to touch on the first part of your question because you're absolutely accurate, and it's interesting and to understand maybe the reason why Andy Kotelnicki at Kansas had a lot of success against Aaron Henry, the defensive coordinator at Illinois, last year when Kansas played Illinois. It's due to the fact that Aaron Henry at his core is really a man defense principled coordinator. And that's what they want to run. That's the way that they built themselves in 2022. Ryan Walters was their coordinator. He gets the job at Purdue, and Aaron Henry wants to be that style of defense. Well, when you go against an offensive coordinator that is going to shift and move and then cross as much as a guy like Andy Kotelnicki will do, that becomes problematic. And what happens is that you will break down and lose contain. And when they lose players, Penn State is going to have to capitalize. I do think it's going to be difficult, but that's why Andy Kotelnicki had success against Aaron Henry a year ago. The environment, I think, is going to be very difficult, although Luke Altmaier and that offense handled the Nebraska environment just fine. I thought it was fascinating that James Franklin called for whiteout energy. He understands that this is not the whiteout game, but he's like, I want that whiteout energy this week because this is a very good opponent. I like Penn State in this game. There's something about this team. They've fixed what we wanted them to fix. Rev, think about it, right? We wanted them to be more explosive on offense. Well, they've done that. And the run game has really benefited. We wanted Drew Aller to be a more threatening quarterback as it relates to throwing the ball down the field. Guess what? He's 5th in college football in air yards per attempt. So the very things that we wanted them to change and fix from a year ago, they're doing that. And because of that, I like him in this game.
It'll be interesting to see their defense against Luke Altmaier because the defense hasn't quite been at the level
of last year. That's a really, really high bar and maybe an unfair bar, but Illinois is pretty good, as you said, so we'll see on the other side of the ball. You guys have Minnesota and Michigan, Little Brown Jug. The Gophers struggled to stop the run last week against Iowa, and now you get Michigan, and we've already outlined the degree to which they relied on the run game against USC. Do you see this just being a game where Michigan tries to run it until Minnesota proves they can stop it?
Well, the first thing I did is look at flights that left at like 3 o'clock.
You'll get out of there quick.
This game might be like an hour and a half long. All joking aside, you know, this is a matchup that Minnesota has got to go back to the drawing board on and be like, okay, what we just saw, we're going to get a lot more of this week. You know, if Michigan is a different and maybe a better version of Iowa, because both of the teams are going to struggle trying to threaten you down the field, which means you can play heavy run defense, and yet both offenses are going to force you to be perfect in your run defensive structure, because they're going to continue to probe and test and play fundamentally sound and play aggressive, and their offensive line gets off the ball and they can double team and they've got tight ends and they're going to pull and they're going to smash. Like last week, USC did a great job outside of about 4 or 5 runs, right? And look what happened. They lose the game. And now you're going in, if you're Minnesota, in a game where you've got to be perfect every single time, because Michigan is going to test them 40, 45, 50 times. And they better be ready for it. They better buckle it up, because Caleb Johnson was phenomenal in that game. And so in this game, Khalil Mullings and Donovan Edwards, they might have a field day. So Minnesota's got to correct some of those issues up front.
Excited to watch that one. Big noon coming your way on Saturday with Joel and Gus and Jenny. Should be fabulous. Always appreciate your time. Thanks, Joel.
You bet, man. Absolutely.
The game matching 2 QBs who are off to hot starts. Maryland's Billy Edwards and the Hoosiers' Curtis Rourke. They are 2 of just 3 quarterbacks in the conference who've thrown for more than 1,000 yards this year, with Will Rogers being the other. Obviously, the number of games played a factor there, but both have been really good by every measure. Top 7 in the league in pass efficiency. It's a really good game. There's a ton of good angles here, Howard, but quarterback's a good place to start.
Yeah, it's a great place to start, and both these quarterbacks are doing what they need to be able to move this offense, their prospective offenses forward, 75% of the passes that they're completing. I mean, they are moving their offenses, and you look at what Edwards has been able to do with Ty Felton. It gives them a shot, and it's really been fun to really watch both of these quarterbacks operate in pocket, and they understand what they need to do. They're taking care of the football, and they're finding their big play receivers. And when you look at this Maryland offense, Ty Felton is just off to an unbelievable start. He's doing great work this year.
It's a great story. I mean, a young man who was hurt in high school and lost out on some recruiting opportunities, but Maryland stuck with him, believed in him, and then he has just worked on his craft. I mean, he would stay in the facility from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. catching tennis balls off the Jugs machine over the summer, and he just became a better player. And it's cool to see Billy Edwards, too. Yeah. And I thought Mike Loxley had a great quote where people were expressing surprise over Billy Edwards, and he said, you know, I know what I'm doing a little bit when it comes to quarterbacks. Like, I've had some success with quarterbacks through the years. But I think, like, when we were at camp, I didn't really necessarily think Billy Edwards was going to be the starting quarterback. I thought it might have been M.J. Morris, but here's a kid who's just put his nose to the grindstone, stuck around, gotten better, and this is the fruits of his labor.
And we've seen this as well when you look at Miller Moss and what he's been able to do, talking about staying in the system when you have opportunities that maybe you can go elsewhere because you believe that you should be on the field right now. Both of those guys were playing behind dynamic players that were starters. There's a reason why. And they hung in there. And really, you think about the respect that they have to garner from their teammates to be able to step in there and play. And both guys give them opportunities to play within the system. And Rourke's done an amazing job as well, playing inside the system. He's worked toward it and continued. He struggled a little bit when we saw him for the first time, but there's a reason he's put up the kind of numbers in his football career that he has.
Well, you mentioned Miller Moss and interesting developments for his team and USC, because, breaking news, the Trojans are going to be without Bear Alexander for the remainder of the season. The former 5-star recruit will apparently redshirt this season. This according to Tony Jones, the man who Alexander calls his father. He was apparently unhappy with his role in the Trojans' D. He's played in their 3 games, so he can redshirt, could actually technically play 1 more game, as it turns out. Has 4 tackles on the year. Alexander started his career at Georgia. You see the reports there from social media as to Bear Alexander's decision. And so the Trojans will move on without him. They'll host Wisconsin, a team with a new quarterback, trying to bounce back from that loss. Developments for his team and USC, because, breaking news, the Trojans are going to be without Bear Alexander for the remainder of the season. The former 5-star recruit will apparently redshirt this season. It's according to Tony Jones, the man who Alexander calls his father. He was apparently unhappy with his role in the Trojans' D. He's played in their 3 games, so he can redshirt, could actually technically play 1 more game, as it turns out. Has 4 tackles on the year. Alexander started his career at Georgia. You see the reports there from social media as to Bear Alexander's decision. And so the Trojans will move on without him. They'll host Wisconsin, a team with a new quarterback, trying to bounce back from that loss against Alabama. So you've got 2 teams, I think, coming off performances that they kind of like to have back. It's going to be interesting to see how each one of them responds.
It will be, and let's look at USC first, right? We had talked about what they've been able to do on the defensive side of football and really control games and be able to be creative defensively to create pressure on quarterbacks. But one of the things we saw in the last game is that their inability to tackle at certain points really caused them some problems. You talk about runners, they were able to get extra yards and they couldn't hold them where they needed to. So that became a problem. So now you have a team that's obviously got to get better at that, and they're going to need to be able to do it. And you got to find a way to correct the mistakes from a week ago. Defensively,
that felt like the USC team that, in anticipation of them joining the league, I had watched over the last couple of years periodically to just try to get a sense, okay, what are we getting here? They were not a good tackling team for the last couple of years. They had been a really good tackling team this year, and part of it is the backs they were trying to bring down. I mean, Mullings and Edwards are really good. From Wisconsin's point of view, now you have Braden Locke at quarterback. Feel terrible for Tyler Van Dyke. There's just a lot going on with Wisconsin. It feels to me like they're still trying to figure out some sort of offensive identity.
Who are they?
Howard, who are they? Who is Wisconsin offensive?
And I think it's still a work in progress. And you mentioned it now, having Locke at quarterback. What are you going to be doing now? What's going to be the emphasis? We saw them start to run the ball and having some more success doing that. Is that the direction they want to go? You think about what the conversations were coming into the season, and the conversations were we need to be more creative offensively, whether that's the run game, whether that's in the pass game. How do you do that? Now having to make the switch and play with another quarterback, are you going to be able to get into that mold to find out what you want to be able to do? But this is where, things become challenges. And then, the other side of the football defensively, I really like the progression they're making there, but this is a USC team that's stung by what happened last week, so they have to really find a way to get going as well.
And Mike Tressel said he still doesn't feel like they totally have their identity on defense. He's still trying to fit the pieces that they inherited at Wisconsin to the schemes that he wants to run. So they're still figuring it out. Figuring it out. Year 2 under Luke Fickell. The dramatic conclusion. Games we have yet to cover, Purdue and Nebraska. Some numbers that caught our eye from the last game. You see Purdue limited in its passing yards. Nebraska struggling to run the ball against Illinois. And then how about Oregon taking on UCLA? And you see the numbers against Oregon State for the Ducks. And the Bruins got off to a nice first half in Baton Rouge before they struggled offensively in the second. But Oregon was interesting to see, not allowing any sacks against the Beavers. And when Dylan Gabriel has time in the pocket, he's pretty good. Actually, he's pretty good when he doesn't have time in the pocket, but when it's clean, he's really good.
Yeah, this offensive line, for whatever reason, and whether it was earlier in the season, just the opponents or whatever it may be, they weren't playing at a high enough level where we expected this team to be. We know that they can be physical and want to be physical. I think this is the type of team now with the O-line gaining that confidence that they have now from their last performance. I think they're going to want to come out and continue to play that way. That's where they have to be.
Dylan Gabriel said to his offensive lineman, if you give me the time, I will do the crime.
Yeah.
You like that?
I do.
Yeah.
And remember, he's taking care of those guys up front, too.
Yes, he is. Yeah, he is. What about Nebraska and Purdue? Nebraska, that's a heartbreaking game. Yes. Purdue, we know, has been really banged up, but man, they have not played well here these last couple games.
Yeah.
One quick thought on that one.
Well, you think about Nebraska, they've got to get over this mental hump. They've got to get over it. They've got to be able to close out games. Purdue, they have to really, with Hudson Card, have to be better. They have to take care of him because I think he's a much better quarterback, and he's proven he's a better quarterback.
They have got to figure out a way to stop the run, too. I mean, you give up over 700 rushing yards.
They've got some injuries over there as well.
I know they do, and they got injuries in the pass game, too. Yeah. Offensive line's banged up. Yeah. Edrin has missed a few games, but
get right.
They got to get right. We got right. We're so thrilled you joined us. Wani and Jerry tomorrow.